Hello, this is Paul, the Oka Knight, coming back to you once again with part two of Fire in the Sky, Day of Infamy, where I'm playing through the Japanese half of the first turn of the game, and that would be the December 1941 turn, which of course is why I call it the Day of Infamy. Where we left off, we were just about to enter the air deployment phase, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get that started. Next is the air commitment phase, which is where the phasing player commits his air units to offensive action. Defending air units for the non-phasing player are considered committed in the hex that they reside in. The air units for the attacker can go ahead and go out one hex. So first, all four air units in Saigon are going to commit to bomb the British naval forces in Singapore. Second, the Japanese air units in Formosa are going to commit to attack Manila. Note that the aircraft carrier, even though it has aircraft on it, is not an air unit. It is a naval unit, and we're only committing air units at this part of the player turn. Note that this allocation does not cost any points. So this is kind of another freebie move. And the only other air units possessed by the Japanese are on Truk and the Marshall Islands, and these have no targets within range. Has to be with one hex, so they just sit there. They are not going to be allocated to air attack. And yes, here is what you've been waiting for. We're up to the combat phase. Those of you with heightened sensitivities should skip ahead to the end of the tutorial, where I will shamelessly promote myself and ask you to subscribe to this channel. The combat sequence begins with the submarine attack segment, which is where the American submarines can go ahead and take shots at ships at sea. Each shot takes one subpoint. The Allies at this point have 2 subpoints, not a whole lot, but more importantly, they have modifiers that basically add up to where they can't hit anything. So it makes no sense to even try to take a shot at any of the Japanese units on the map, because anything at sea also has at least one destroyer with it. Now, that's not the end of the world, because any subpoints that are left over from this turn's subpoints can be used in turn 2 to go after the merchantmen to bring down the number of merchant points that the Japanese have, which will bring down the number of transport points they get at the beginning of the turn. When merchantmen are hit, it's a one-way street. The number only gets smaller. They start with 60. Every hit knocks it down by 2 throughout the whole course of the game. So what will happen is that as the game goes on, the Japanese, because of the submarine war, will have fewer and fewer transport points, especially later in the game where the whole thing accelerates. They will have fewer and fewer transport points to move their units around, especially as you saw, that's used to do land units, it's used to move air units. So we basically so far have burnt through 51 of 60 transport points. So transport points are useful things to have. So right now there's going to be no on-map use of the submarines. They will go after the transport points next turn. So I think what we'll do is go ahead and do the automatic victories. Let's kind of tick them off and get them out of the way, and we'll go from the least complex to the most complex battle that is going to occur this turn. So what we're going to do is find basically automatic victories, okay? And if there's no issues with summaries, if there's no defenders, then it's going to be an automatic victory. So let's go ahead and go through those. We have an automatic victory in Brunei. That's now, what I'm doing is putting down occupied base markers. That's telling you the base is in the process of changing hands. So the occupied base marker is done, is down. We've got another automatic victory here in Leh. And we no longer need the Tokyo Express. And we got another automatic victory in Rabaul. Those troops have now landed. They're no longer on the water. Okay, I can leave it there. Let's see. We have an automatic victory in the Gilberts. And from what I see here, everywhere else has something going on. So let's go ahead and pick the simplest one and see how this is going to work. Let's begin with the air attack on the British ships in Singapore. So this is going to be going against the Duke of York, its group, as well as the destroyer group. The attackers are going to be the land-based air that's coming down from Saigon. So the first step after the submarines are done is battle board preparation, where we transfer things over to the battle board, and they give us this handy-dandy marker to show where the battle is. So because we're all old guys and we forget stuff, the battle is happening right there in Singapore. In placing the units on the battle board, we're going to find which box they belong in. And in this case, we're saying that these British ships did not leave port, and so they are ships at anchor. They're ships at anchor. And the Japanese air units are coming in at long range. They're coming in at range 1, so they are long range air. So that's all we have to do for this setup. The next segment is for air combat. The British have no aircraft here. The Japanese have the 4 long-range air. They are cut in half for being in long range. So the 8 points of air units, 2 on each counter, is going to total 4 air units. So we place the air points for the Japanese at 4. The British don't have anything. Now, this is the point where air-to-air combat would occur, but since the Japanese aircraft are flying unopposed, we skip on to target determination. And from there, we're going to get to airstrikes. After air-to-air combat is done, however, the status of air control is ascertained, and one of these 2 counters is placed on the battle board to reflect that. Each counter has 2 sides, one showing air superiority for the relevant side. The other is for air supremacy. Air superiority is achieved when, after air-to-air combat, one side has more remaining air points than the other. Air supremacy is achieved when one side has totally eliminated all the air power from the other side, or in this case, there was none to begin with. So the Japanese having 4 air points and none are on the opposite side, on the Allied side, they have achieved air supremacy, and that does give die modifiers during the course of the battle, so it's a very good thing to have. The game provides these little cubes to show base control when a base is switched side, but I've added some more from just stuff that I've got because I like to use them to show where the air points are being allocated. You could do it with dice or by whatever means you want. I like to use these little cubes. So let's go ahead and allocate these cubes to their targets. And in this go-around, I have opted to put all the air power, all 4 air points, up against the battleships Repulse and Prince of Wales. I want to kill those guys dead. I could split one off, maybe, and put one in against the destroyer group, and sometimes I do that, getting greedy, trying to get both. It's all dependent on the dice, so I don't know. I don't think there's a correct answer there. It's just how lucky you are and how you feel about it. In this case, we'll do a conservative and just go after the battleship. Because the British ships have not left port, this attack is considered to be hitting the base rather than any task force that may be at sea. After the aircraft have been allocated, you would normally do an anti-aircraft round where the base would get to shoot its anti-aircraft fire at these planes. However, there's a special scenario rule that says on turn 1, the bases have no anti-aircraft, so these planes are all going to be able to get in. Normally, it would be calculated as half the air factor for the hex, so this particular hex can support 8 air points. And so the anti-aircraft for Singapore would be 4, which would be 4 dice. And they'd be rolling, without modifiers, they'd be rolling for 5s and 6s. So, but that's not the case. These planes are going to go straight in. So how do we go ahead and execute the attack? Well, we look at the combat table, which is on the player 8 card, and you look under the airstrike heading, and you see the list of modifiers. So we'll just read those off. Player has air supremacy, +1. Well, we know we have that because there were Japanese planes left in the zone without any Allied planes in the zone at all. Target is a naval unit at anchor. These guys are. That's another +1. Target is an air-land unit, part of a task force. Nope, these are not air-land units. These are naval units. Japanese air point on Japanese part of turn 1. Yes. And the others have to do with optional rules for British carriers, which is used by the scenario, and Japanese elite air points, which is not. So we have a +3 to the die roll, and all attack rolls are shooting for 5s and 6s. We have 4 air points attacking, so we're going to roll 4 dice, looking for 2s or better to hit. Here we go. We got 3 hits. 3 hits. 3 hits are assigned to the Repulse/Prince of Wales. The next step is to see what these hits do to the ships. So we have 3 hits on the Prince of Wales group. We are rolling for each hit separately. Now each hit does count. The ship is hit. That means it is going to be damaged and is going to be spending some time in repair. It spends twice the number of replacement phases as the number of hits it has taken, including anyone that might even happen the current turn. So if the American has not gone yet, or the Allies have not gone yet, the replacement phase that comes in their player turn does count. And that is the case in this case. So we've got 3 hits, so it's laid up for 6 replacement phases, including the current turn. So it's going to be out of action for a while regardless. But if we hit any of these numbers, the ship is destroyed. The ship is sunk. So the first one, let's see, the armor rating is 10. We have a -2. Let's roll. Well, we roll a 10. So right away, the ship is going to the briny deep. The Prince of Wales group is sunk. So we're going to take things off the battle board and go back to Singapore. Put the Lonely Destroyer back in Singapore and the aircraft back in Saigon, and continue on to the next battle. And we will now move on to the attack at Wake Island. The forces here, the Japanese have a single destroyer group, and they're trying to sneak in the Special Naval Landing Force, the SNLF troops. Their brigade trying to take Wake Island. And we have a lone Allied air point, a lone American air point trying to stop them. Because this is a simple situation, I don't think we need to go down the whole combat phase. This is going to come down to the anti-aircraft shot against the Allied aircraft, and then the bombing against the SNLF troops. Now, the anti-aircraft rating for the destroyer is half a point, only half a point. Practice are rounded down, so half rounds down to 0, and so there is no anti-aircraft. Note to self, maybe it's better to bring 2 destroyers next time. But as it stands, there's only going to be 1 die roll here, and that is going to be the aircraft that are attacking the SNLF brigade. Now, first we again take a look at the modifiers that come into play. That would be in the airstrike area of the combat table. And we see that there's +1 for air supremacy. This time the Americans have it. And there's a +1 for target is an air-land unit that is part of a task force. And this one is. So it's going to be +2. Base is 5, 6, so it's going to hit on a 3 through 6 and miss on a 1 or 2. A 6 is rolled, and a hit will be assigned to the SNLF troops, and actually that will just flip the unit over. Any landing troops that have a hit on them may not land. So the as happened historically, the first attack on Wake Island was unsuccessful. So for now, the ships remain at sea, and the Wake Island defenders are holding fast. Moving over to the Philippines, we have 2 Japanese task force coming in. We have the carrier group that is led by the Zuho and Shoho, and we have the invasion group with the 14th Army embarked. We also have 4 full-strength air units, 8 air points coming across from Formosa, attacking the ground troops, MacArthur's ground troops, the 6th Army, as well as the air units that may or may not get caught on the ground. All right, we're going to dispense with the submarines, again, because they had no chance of hitting, and we're going to go straight to the battle board. All the units are transferred to the battle board, and we go ahead and put the battle marker in place to remind us that, yes, this is indeed where the battle is occurring. All units have been placed on the battle board. We have placed the American air units are in the airbase box. They will take off and they will fight. And they will fight as defenders. They will fight at full strength. They will have 2 air points. The 6th Army is in the land box, which is where it belongs. We don't know the status of the air yet, so let's take that out from the last battle. The Japanese have 4 full-strength air units on long-range attack that halves their effective strength. So instead of being 2 points each, they are 1 point each. We also have an aircraft carrier with naval air supporting with 2 points, totaling 6 air points for the Japanese and 2 air points for the Americans. All carriers are placed in their task force in the task force box. For convenience, I have spread them out a little. If you had more than one carrier group in here, more than one carrier task force, they would be separate from one another. We have a single bombardment group. So we have the cruiser and the destroyer, as well as the troops. They are considered to be part of a single task force. Again, if there was more than one task force here, they would be in separate stacks. Now that things are placed, the first thing we do is determine the outcome of the air-to-air engagement that's going to take place. Normally, this is simultaneously executed. Each side rolls a number of dice equal to the number of air points, applies their modifiers, and knocks out the corresponding number of planes on the other side. However, on turn 1, there's a special rule in place where it is not simultaneous. All Japanese air-to-air engagements are resolved first. All their attacks are resolved first, with all the damage being applied, and then and only then do the Allies respond. So it kind of stinks to be American on the first turn of the game. All right, so we have 6 air points for the Japanese. Again, always, the base number to hit is 5 or 6, and it will be modified with a single modifier, and a +1 for the Japanese attack on turn 1. It really stinks to be an American on turn 1. All right, so we have 6 points coming in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we got dice. Sort of. All right, we're shooting for 4, 5s, and 6s. There are 2 Allied air points. If we get 2 hits, they're wiped out. Oh, well, we got 5 hits. So the worm kind of turns a little bit. So these air points are eliminated. The air strength goes down to 0. And Japanese air supremacy is established over the combat zone. Note that even though the effective air strength has been pushed down to 0, that does not damage the air unit itself. That can only happen through bombing the base. Since the Japanese did not receive any hits during the air-to-air engagement, there are still 6 air points to be allocated to targets. Now, targets could be task forces, and you have to do it by task force for each individual air point attacking, or the land base. And since there are no American task forces here, all 6 are going to go after the contents of the base. And that could be against the air unit or against the land unit. Each individual air point can decide where it wants to go. Since the Japanese did not receive any hits during the air-to-air engagement, there are still 6 air points to be allocated to targets. Now, targets could be task forces, and you have to do it by task force for each individual air point attacking, or the land base. And since there are no American task forces here, all 6 are going to go after the contents of the base. And that could be against the air unit or against the land unit. Each individual air point can decide where it wants to go. The 6 attacking air points have been allocated, 5 going against the air unit and 1 going against the ground unit. I hope I don't end up regretting this, but I wanted to at least try to rough up the ground unit just a little bit to give an edge to the invading force. All right, the modifiers for this attack are air supremacy +1 and turn 1 Japanese bombarding units with their air units. It stinks to be American on turn 1. All right, so let's do the important one first. We got 5 attacks, 5 points hitting the air unit. We want to get 2 hits to eliminate the unit. The +2 means normally it's a 5-6 to hit. 3, 4, 5, 6 is what we need. 5 dice, here we go. That's 1, 2, 3 hits. Okay, so 2 misses, 2 misses. This air unit is eliminated. And that is the absolutely what we needed to have happen. That air unit had to go for reasons I explained earlier. All right, we have one point hitting the ground unit. So this will be again 3, 4, 5, 6. And that is a miss. Not having the best of luck with the Japanese, that's for sure. But at least we took out the air unit. All right, the next thing. The next step of the process is to move naval units from the bombardment box into the sea control box. It's part of the process of seeing who has control of the sea in this zone. There are no American units in this hex, so it should be a pretty easy job for the Japanese to establish sea control. So in this case, simply moving the destroyer unit into the sea control box is sufficient to establish sea control, which will allow the 8-point ground unit to go ahead and land. So the 14th Army has gone ahead and landed in the Philippines. And after replacements are taken, the next step would be the ground support phase. I think I made a mistake. I shouldn't have rolled for the attack on the land unit until this phase, so that was part of the ground support process. They missed, so it's okay. The next thing that happens, though, would be that the cruiser can take a bombardment shot. And to do this, the cruiser has one die, and so it would roll a 5 or 6 to see if it hits. But there is a modifier, and that modifier is player has air supremacy and air point providing ground support. And we meet both of those criteria. So this heavy cruiser will hit on a 4, 5, or 6. What could possibly go wrong? 4! They hit! Oh, what do you know? The American 6th Army has taken 1 hit. Next, we move on to resolving the ground combat. The first step is establishing who has supply and who does not. Ground units where the Navy controls the sea zone, having established sea control, the Japanese are automatically in supply. Because the Japanese have established sea control, the Allied ground unit, the 6th Army, is automatically out of supply. And what this does is that the 6th Army is going to have a -1 on all its die rolls. So it's going to roll 8 dice, and it's going to be rolling for 6s. The Japanese are going to roll 8 dice, which is the strength of the ground unit, and it's going to be rolling for hits on a 5 or a 6. So again, it kind of stinks to be the American in December 41. The die rolls are resolved simultaneously, so I'm going to go ahead and roll the Americans, see what they do. 8 dice, rolling for 6s, and they achieve 1 hit. Now the Japanese are going to roll. Japanese rolling for a 5 or a 6. And the Japanese roll much better, actually better than average for a change, and they achieve 4 hits on the 6th Army. So the outcome of the ground combat is resolved as follows. Because the Japanese delivered more hits on the American than vice versa, they receive no hits. They're fine. So this goes away. Now we look at the American unit. Since the Japanese delivered a total of 5 hits to this unit, including the one from earlier, and that exceeds the number of hits that were delivered to the Japanese unit, which was 1, the American unit is at minimum going to be cut in half. It's going to be damaged. If it was true that the Japanese players' total was greater than the American players' total, plus the non-phasing players' combat strength total, so that would be the American, then all phasing players' units are eliminated, all of them. So what that means is that you take a look at the differential of hits, which was 4, and if that was greater than the strength of the unit, which is 8, that would eliminate the unit outright. So it would have taken 10 hits because the Americans delivered 1 hit, and it has to be greater than 8. You subtract that off of the number of hits that were delivered to the American unit. If it was 10, it would subtract down to 9, which exceeds the 8-point strength of the unit. That would eliminate the unit outright. But as it is, the 6th Army is reduced. And the Japanese have accomplished pretty much everything they wanted to do in the Philippines. So this one went very well. It is possible to eliminate an 8-point unit in one turn, but it's highly unlikely. So this was a very, very good result for the Japanese. And now the units go back to the map. And so we see the initial battle of the Philippines was in the Japanese favor. However, the Americans still retain control of the island. It has not changed hands as yet, although it's looking pretty dicey for the Americans going forward. The Japanese ships retain themselves in their two separate task forces. They do not combine. So you have the cruiser destroyer task force and the one with the aircraft carrier. And the Japanese army is on the Philippine Islands. So it's still, the fight will continue next turn. All right, and the last battle we have is what you've probably all been waiting for. We're going to do the Day of Infamy, the attack on Pearl Harbor. And so we have the Kido-Butai, the 6 large Japanese carriers, 3 counters worth in this game, attacking Pearl Harbor. The Americans are all in port, waiting to get hit. The air units are present. There's 2 2-point American air units here and some ground units. So because, as we've done earlier, the submarines are not a factor on turn 1, we're simply going to move this all over to the battle board. We place the battle marker in Pearl Harbor and we move on to the battle board. Taking a look at the board, we see that the Japanese have 11 air points present from their 3 aircraft counters, a 4, 4, and a 3. Simply add up the little airplanes on the counter and total it up. The Americans have 4 points of ground-based air present. All of the American ships are in the harbor, in port. Here's the air units at their air base. Here's the Kido-Butai out at sea, getting ready to do their thing. All right, so the first step of this procedure, again, is to go ahead. We're not worried about submarines. They all miss. So that we're going to do the air-to-air combat. Due to the scenario rule, all Japanese air points will go ahead and do their attack against the American units, and all results will be applied before the Americans can respond. So ideally, they want to just eliminate them and move on. All right, we're going to have 11 dice. Air-to-air combat, we're going to have pluses for the first turn, and that's that. Japanese will have 11 dice rolling for 4s or better. All right, I have my fistful of dice. Let's see how this turns out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hits. Okay, so the 6 hits are sufficient to knock down the American air cover completely. All results are applied. So the 4 American air points goes to 0. And the Japanese have established air supremacy, which we mark accordingly. All right. Now, again, as before, we knocked the Americans out of the air, but the air units have not been damaged. Their status is, they're done for this turn, but for this player turn, but they are still there. So to eliminate them, they have to be actually attacked in air to ground. In the next step, we're going to apply our 11 air points to targets. Now, at this point, the Japanese would have to choose whether to go after task forces or the base, but there are no task forces, so all 11 points are going to go after the base. They can be applied to ground units, although without ground combat, makes no sense. Air units, which makes a lot of sense, and of course the ships. Now, this is where my personal bias comes in. I prefer to go heavy on the aircraft and resultingly lighter on the ships. That most of these ships are these old battleships that have marginal use, certainly compared to the ones that come later. But knocking out the air units now has the advantage of basically denying their use early in the game to the American. Making them pick up off the map means that the Japanese will have a freer hand around Guadalcanal and Port Moresby because they will not be available to deploy out that way. So I like to go heavy on these aircraft and see what I can do to them. Okay, I've allocated my points. I'm putting 5 on the ships, putting 1 on 3 of the battleships. 1 is slightly more valuable. He will inherit. He will be hit with 2 attacks. and we're going to put 6 on the air units. Now, just to review the modifiers for a second, the combat table and the player aid, which contains all of the modifiers. We're going to go look air, ground, air strike. Okay, player is air supremacy. Yes, so both the attack on the planes and the ships will have that. Target is a naval unit at anchor. Yes, but only for the ships. Target is a airland unit, part of a task force. No. Japanese air point on turn 1. Yes. Those are the only things possible at this point of the game. So the attack on the airfield is going to be at a +2. The attack on the ships is going to be at a +3. All right, so let's go ahead and let's spread this out a little bit. Let's do the ships. So I'm going to roll. Here's the attack for anything other than a 1. We'll do a hit on the Pennsylvania, Arizona. Here we go, and that's a hit. And just for fun, I like to use those when I'm damaging ships. All right, let's do another one. This is on the Nevada, Oklahoma. It's a hit. Boom. Now, 2 attacks. Well, let's do the California, Tennessee. Okay, so California, Tennessee, it's going to be +3, anything but a 1, and we're going to get a hit on that trailing battleship, and then we'll do the double attack on the other guy. And yes, that hits. Ba-boom. Oh man, the humanity. Okay, here we go. The Maryland, West Virginia, 2 dice. Oh, 2 hits, both 6s. Doesn't matter as long as they're hits, but 2 hits. Let's see how the attack on the airfield goes. We have 6 dice, and we only got a +2, so we're shooting for 3, 4, 5, or 6 on the ground-based air units. And this will damage them. All right, here we go. Oh, crap. Well, okay, we got 3 hits. 3 hits. Three misses. Okay, so we do 3 damage to the air units on the ground. So what we are left with is that the American air units on the ground are reduced to 1 point of strength from the 4 that they were before, and we have hits on the battleships to resolve. 4 modifiers on the hits. When the hit is delivered by an air unit, that's a +1. When it's on this turn 1, it's another +1. It stinks to be an American on turn 1. And the second hit, each hit after the first gets an additional +1. So on the Maryland, West Virginia, the second hit is going to get an additional +1. So it's going to be +2s, except for the second hit on the Maryland, West Virginia, which would be a +3. All right, again, so the way this works is that each hit will result in a 2d6 rolled. We have modifiers of +2 on the first roll for the ships that have been hit 1 time. So their 10 defense, which is right here, goes to an 8. A roll of 8 or more sinks the ship. Less than that, the ship is damaged, and it goes to the turn track for repair. And the length of time it's on the return track is going to depend on how many hits. Okay, here we go. First one is got a 9. Boom! Pennsylvania doesn't make it. That ship is gone. Second one, the Nevada, rolling for 8s. A 3. This ship is still here. Third ship, let's take the one with 1 hit. 2d6. 5. That ship is damaged. It is still around. Finally, 2 rolls of 2d6. The first one at +2, which means an 8 to kill it. The second one at +3, that means a 7 to kill it. This will be on the Maryland. First roll is a 3. Nothing. Well, it's damaged. Second roll for 7. 9. It's sunk. Okay. So the result of this naval part of the attack is that 2 battleships were sunk and eliminated. 2 were damaged and are going to be placed on the turn track. The damaged battleships, who have each taken 1 hit, will reappear a number of turns in the future based on the number of hits they have taken. That is expressed as the number of friendly reinforcement phases. So a single hit on each one will come in 2 friendly reinforcement phases after the current turn. Since this is a Japanese part of the turn, of turn 1, these units will reappear in the reinforcement phase of the American turn 2. And so ends the Battle of Pearl Harbor. The total losses for the Americans: 2 battleships sunk, 2 damaged coming back in pretty short order, and 3 of 4 air points destroyed. Japanese took no losses. Return to base phase, where all naval units that activated, whether it be during an operational movement or be it reaction movement, will all go back to base and revert to their inactive sides. As long as Singapore is British held, all British naval units must return to base back to Singapore instead of the Indian Ocean ports. As we can see, all the Japanese ships have returned back to their home ports. These would be only the ships that activated. All the other ships remained where they were in an inactive state, and likewise the ones that returned to port have reverted to inactive state. After all naval units return to their respective bases, any bases that were captured and should have an occupied base marker on them will be taken over by whichever side took them over, and the appropriate cube, white for Japanese, blue for Allied, is placed in the hex, unless the base is reverting back to its original owner, in which case you just remove the cube that's there. And finally, in the return to base phase, all stacking units are applied. The second deployment phase allows units to deploy a second time with some exceptions. The phasing player can again redeploy their units during the second deployment phase. There are some exceptions. Any land unit or air unit that used operational movement may not deploy. And second, 1 hex movement is not allowed in the second deployment phase. Beyond that, units can go ahead and execute another deployment phase, but they do have to pay points. It's not a free move. And where we are with our Japanese player, they are down to 9 transport points. So anything that we spend here is going to bite us when we try to collect oil at the beginning of the next turn, because that happens before we get our new points. In the case in point, I think the one thing that I might do is to advance the air unit from Truk to Rabaul, just to get some air zones of control farther south to interfere with units moving around through Guadalcanal, possibly resupplying Port Moresby. Port Moresby is 8 hexes away from Pearl Harbor, so if we get an air ZOC in the way, it could cost them another increment of movement and additional points to redeploy anything into Port Moresby. So that may be worth doing. And the primary thing that happens in the end phase is counting up the points. And in this first turn, we had the Japanese score 1, 2, 3. They have 4 points. They picked up Brunei, Lae, Rabaul, and the Gilberts. They failed, however, in their invasion of Wake Island, which could haunt them in the future. But beyond that, they're doing okay. And they're actually doing quite well in Manila. I expect Manila to fall possibly next turn. Now let's talk a little bit of strategy for the Japanese player going into turn 2 and farther out in the game. For turn 2, you have some primary must-do objectives that you have to go after. Number 1, Rangoon. You're going to need to move the 15th Army from Bangkok down the trail over to Rangoon with a free move, because it is going down the trail, which is a good thing. But you're going to need more than that, because you actually want to take the place this turn. You're going to need to send your 2 fastest carrier groups from Kure all the way to Rangoon with 2 destroyers to escort them, to keep the submarines away, because the submarines are going to be more of a threat going on from this turn forward. The distance from Kure to Rangoon is 8 hexes, so that is the maximum move for your fastest 2 carrier groups. And of course the destroyers have no problem going that far either. You got to take it, so don't go skinny. Second, you have to invade Singapore. The group that's sitting in Hainan that you didn't move last turn is primed and ready to go, and their job is to start the process of capturing Singapore. This will probably take 2 turns, but you don't want it to take 3 turns, because in turn 4 you start losing points. In this particular game with Manila, we've done very well. So the 4 air units that are sitting in Formosa probably don't need any help because they're all going to be going after that weakened American army. And my guess is that they're going to be able to put it out of commission. You might want to put a naval unit or two there so that you can assure yourself of sea control. And with sea control, you get some modifiers. He's only throwing for a 6 to hit you, and you're throwing 5s or 6s on him. And that matters as far as how hard it is to take a guy out. A third must do, Surabaya, the Netherlanders. You got to take them out. Good news is that they're not strong. They don't have a flip side on any of their counters, so if you can deliver one hit on them, that ought to be sufficient to blow them out of there. But you need to start getting your second oil source. You've got one, but you're going to need to have two for turn 2, and then Singapore is your third, and that will probably take a couple turns. But you got to get that process started too. By turn 4, you want Manila to fall. You want to have all 3 of your oil hexes going. Okay. Let's see. Other things that are on the nice to-do list. Guadalcanal is wide open now. You can move in, and if you can afford it, that is a good objective. Wake Island was not taken. If you can afford it, you can go after that. The Americans have one aircraft carrier, okay? But they don't get their reinforcements until their half of their turn. So the turn 2 reinforcements don't come until after you're done with your turn 2. So they're still weak. They have one aircraft carrier. All those slow battleships are not here now, but 2 of them are going to come back, and they're half a turn 2. And once they're there, they're within reaction range. Your best opportunity now is to go for it on turn 2 if you can swing it. Probably need to send some kind of carrier force there. Not as big, perhaps, as what's going to Rangoon, but you need something more than just a light carrier in all probability. The American carrier that went to Christmas Island, the American carrier that was in Christmas Island will have gone to the west coast of the United States when all the units that had been operated and reacted went back to their home bases. Some of the Japanese went back to Japan. The Americans went back to the west coast with their carrier. They only have one. And then in their reinforcement phase, they will move to Pearl Harbor. So they're going to be in easy reaction range of Wake Island. So if you go without a carrier, you might have a real problem. Now, going forward, your objective, at least what I do, is to go after Port Moresby very hard. Got a 4-point unit there in Leh right now. If the Americans don't reinforce it turn 1, you may very well be able to sneak in there with your 4-point unit in Leh with some support. You may take the place. You're running thin on points at this point, but you might be able to make some trade-offs to take it. So if you give up on retaking Wake and you give up on taking Guadalcanal, you may be able to pummel Port Moresby and take it in one turn. The cool thing about taking Port Moresby is that it now lays open the North Shore of Australia to invasion. So it forces the American player to protect a lot more places. And if you ever take Brisbane, which is 3 victory points, you're well on the way to winning the game. And what you will find as you go forward campaigning for Port Moresby is that you're going to stretch the Americans. They don't have a lot of transport points, and you're going to force them to do double moves into Noumea. And if they want to, say, get a land unit there, as long as you got a zone of control, air zone of control in the way, they may very well have to do a triple move to get land units or replacements into Port Moresby. And essentially, over time, and not too much time, you can bleed them dry from transport points and have a big leg up in taking the place. If you take Manila, one very possible move is to move that unit into Leh and then walk it across the trail the following turn into Port Moresby. And now you're attacking with an 8-point unit. The Americans really, that's tough for them. It takes a lot of points for them to move an 8-point unit 2 jumps, let alone 3 jumps. So you put enough pressure on Port Moresby, you can take it, and then it just lays open so many more places that you can hit. The road to victory is starting to open up. Long term, with the British, in Rangoon and so forth in India, I find that you should not go any farther than Rangoon. I don't think you should. There's nothing there but attrition and a sinkhole for your valuable points for moving the rest of your units around. So I think you have to take Rangoon, but I tend not to go any farther. Yes, the British will eventually gather strength and attack you. They knock your 8-point ground unit down. You have to send replacements in to build it up right away. Probably need to send some of those air units that are in Saigon over to Rangoon to delay their attacks. And that will cost you because eventually they will wear down those air units. However, you're buying time. You're buying time for your real assault on Port Moresby to develop, pushing in the center, gathering points. And what you'll find is if you take Port Moresby and Guadalcanal and maybe Espiritu Santo and something in Australia, you're going to add up the points and find that, taking Attu Island off of Alaska may put you over the top for a sudden death victory, because that is really what you're shooting for. You're trying to win this thing, say, by the end of turn 8 and send the Allies packing. If that doesn't happen, then you may need to prepare for the long game and shift your strategies to be more defensive and harden up your periphery that you're trying to protect, have more points reserved for reaction than attack. But that's part of the game too. And if you don't manage to pull off the quick win, you still are in the game, because it is no piece of cake for the Allies to push forward and knock you out by the end of turn 16. All right, that is all I have for you guys. I hope I helped. From the text messages I got in the first part, I know that I've helped some of you. So hopefully this is completing the picture for you, so that you can feel like you can play the game with some gusto. Okay. All right. Well, hey, if you guys haven't subscribed, if you hung with me this long through 2 parts, please go ahead and give me a subscription. It helps the channel. And it also gives you a heads up as far as what I'm doing. Set yourself up to receive notices when I put things out there, or simply have an easy way to find the channel again in your subscription list. So please go ahead and consider subscribing to the channel. And with that, I think we're done with this for now. This is Paul, the Oaken Knight, wishing you a pleasant evening.